Naming molecular compounds. So the good news about naming molecular compounds is that it's easier than naming ionic compounds. The challenge is you got to make sure that you name only molecular compounds using these set of rules. For ionic compounds, we use a different set of rules. So here we have a bunch of molecules: nitrogen monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, dinitrogen tetraoxide, nitrogen trifluoride, sulfur hexafluoride, and phosphorus pentachloride. So all of these elements here are nonmetals. So when we have nonmetals combining and sharing electrons, that's how we get what's called a molecular compound or a molecule. We also sometimes use the word covalent compound. A molecule is something that is made of covalent bonds. So you probably noticed that we have some prefixes. So we have mono, di, tri, that's 1, 2, 3. Tetra is 4. Penta is 5. Hexa is 6. Sept would be 7. Oct would be 8. Nona is 9. Deca is 10. So what I would like for you to do is to examine the examples, and I want you to write a set of rules for how we can name a molecular compound given the name. How can we write the formula? So examine those formulas and those names and see if you can figure out what the patterns and trends are. Okay, so now we're going to use that set of rules that we wrote to write formulas for each of these names. So go ahead and pause the video and use your rules to try to figure out the formulas for all of these compounds. When you're ready, you can return here to check your work. So we have carbon tetrachloride. So one of the rules is that we don't start with mono. So we don't have monocarbon tetrachloride, it's just CCl4. So 1 carbon, 4 chlorides. Dihydrogen monosulfide, so 2 hydrogens, 1 sulfur. So we're seeing that the endings here are all ending with "ide," chloride, sulfide, iodide. So just like with ionic compounds, we take that second element and change the ending to "ide." So phosphorus triiodide is going to be 1 phosphorus, 3 iodides. Sulfur dibromide, 2 sulfurs, or excuse me, 1 sulfur, 2 bromides. Boron trifluoride. Nitrogen is one of our diatomic elements. So the way that I remember these is have no fear of ice cold beer. So have stands for hydrogen. So a hydrogen molecule is H2. A nitrogen molecule is N2. Fluorine, F2, so that's have no fear. Of is oxygen. Ice is iodide. Cold is chlorine. And beer is bromine. So if you encounter any of these elements by themselves, not in a compound, but just by themselves, they're going to be diatomic. And that's what nitrogen is going to be. It's going to be a diatomic element here. Tetraphosphorus decaoxide, P4O10, and sulfur hexafluoride, SF6. So at the top of the next page, you've got a description of the steps, a detailed description of all the steps to write a formula into a name. So we're going to go ahead and use those to figure out these names. So the first one I have here is N2H4. Now, I know I just said that nitrogen is one of those diatomic elements that only applies when it is by itself. This is in a molecule with a bunch of hydrogen atoms, so that diatomic rule is not going to apply here. So we're going to have to call this dinitrogen. There's 4 hydrogen, so hydrogen becomes hydride, so we have tetrahydride. Next we have Xe, that's xenon. Now there's only one of them, but we're not going to start any names with mono, so we're just going to call this xenon. Now fluorine is going to become fluoride, and there's 4 of them, so that would be tetrafluoride. So we are using our prefixes to indicate how many. We are changing the second element to end with "ide," and we never start with mono. We also want to be on the lookout for any of those diatomic elements. So NH3, only one nitrogen, but we never start with mono, so we just have nitrogen. Hydrogen is going to become hydride, and there's 3 of them, so we have trihydride. This next one, most people already know, probably just from sight. This is carbon dioxide, but that follows those rules. 1 carbon, but we never start with mono, and oxygen becomes oxide, and there's 2 of them. So go ahead and pause the video and take a couple of minutes to work the next 4 formulas into names, and then you can return here whenever you are ready to check your work. So here are our correct answers. This is sulfur dibromide, tetraphosphorus, trioxide, boron, only 1, trichloride, and H2O is called dihydrogen monoxide. Now, some of these have common names, like obviously H2O, we have a common name for that, it's water. NH3, we also have a common name for that, and that is ammonia. So this is just one naming system. This is the one that would be used in like a chemical stockroom. But there are other names for things, and including common names. So for the journal write, you are going to revisit any of the formulas that you got wrong in question 4. So you should rewrite and correct them for journal write 4.